Welcome to The Record. I'm Mercedes Schlapp, in for Greta Van Susteren. Thank you for joining, and Happy New Year. Ahead, President Trump threatens Iran as protests grow in the isolated, unstable regime. The president says the U.S. is locked and loaded if Iran kills protesters. What happens now? Plus, some good news, maybe out of Venezuela. Dictator Nicolás Maduro says he is ready to make a deal on drugs with President Trump. What might that entail? And new developments on the alleged Somali daycare fraud in Minnesota. We will check in with our reporter on the ground in Minneapolis as the FBI and DHS escalate their crackdown. Meanwhile, in New York City, hand on the Quran, Zohran Mamdani takes office as the city's socialist mayor. The policies he is already penning on day 2 of his tenure. But first, for days, people in Iran have been taking to the streets. The demonstrations have led to support and a threat from President Trump. Middle East correspondent Zach Anders is in Tel Aviv, where he is following the latest on Iran. Zach?
Well, Mercedes, the question now, has the post from the president already made an impact, given a boost to these protesters? Crowds tonight in Tehran appear larger, more organized than yesterday. Now, the president writing on True Social in part that, quote, if Iran shoots and violently kills peaceful protesters, which is their custom, the United States of America will come to their rescue, adding that we are locked and loaded and ready to go. A spokesperson for the Ayatollah responding to the president this morning, claiming that any U.S. intervention would sow chaos throughout the region. Another Ayatollah spokesperson posting on X today that the troublemaking was initiated by Trump and that the American people should watch out for their soldiers. Now, remarkably, Iranian leadership has conceded here that the protesters have a point. Iran's President Masoud Pezeshkian says he understands the public's frustration over their economic woes, stating in an interview yesterday that, quote, according to God's Quran, if we do not solve people's problems, we will have a place in hell, he says. Still, this Islamic regime has a brutal history of repression and crackdowns. The last major protest in 2022 led to some 500-plus protesters killed by government forces, human rights groups have found. Reports of as many as 7 protesters killed already this week. Those are unconfirmed. Iran's state-run media thus far only reports 1 death. Yet protesters in several cities are calling for an end to the regime as well. Despite this opposition from government forces, chants of death to the dictator and death to Ayatollah Khamenei heard again today. Those are words that could get you executed there. Now, more than 50 cities have seen some level of unrest, and protests are ongoing as I speak to you now. The regime has limited the amount of information getting out, so we can't tell you how widespread right now these protests are, certainly in Tehran. And in Tehran tonight, videos show riot police firing what appears to be live ammunition to break up these crowds. What we just don't know at this point, Mercedes, is the level of coordination among the protesters, especially in the different cities. It doesn't appear that this movement, if you will, has a rallying figure or a leader figure here. There's certainly been a lot of mention of the son of the Shah, who's exiled in London. He's been posting a lot of messages in support of these protests. And we have seen a lot of these protesters waving the old Iranian flag from before the Islamic Revolution. Now, again, this all started as the collapse protests over the collapsing Iranian currency and record inflation, but it really has taken on a distinct anti-regime tone. Mercedes?
Zach, one quick question here. They talk about this as sort of urban warfare. Do we know who's actually leading these protests against the regime?
Yeah, right now it appears to be a natural grassroots kind of movement. I mean, this started last Sunday as shopkeepers closing in a general protest. They shuttered their doors. The Grand Bazaar was empty. The gold markets were empty. And they were protesting the fact that 1.4 million Iranian rial, their currency, is worth $1 right now. And inflation, food prices are up 70% this time today as they were compared to this time last year. So it was an economic force that put these people out in the streets. And then you just see it growing and growing. And now more and more people are out there. So you have to imagine that they're viewing this as their moment to come together as a nation.
Well, we'll see what happens there. Thank you for your update, Zach Anders. Thank you so much.
Thanks.
Joining me now, our Newsmax foreign policy analyst and former Trump foreign policy advisor Walid Phares, along with senior research fellow for China and national security at the Heritage Foundation, Steve Yates. Walid, I'm going to start with you. How significant are these protests in Iran? How do they compare to past periods of instability?
Excellent question, Mercedes. Thank you for having me. This is the outcome of multi-decades attempts to change that regime and attain freedom. It started in 1999 with the student movement, 2009, where a former president, U.S. president, instead of siding with them, sided with the regime, which prompted this struggle to continue for another 2 decades, significantly in 2019, and of course the Masa Amini revolt that we reported about many times as of 2022. What is happening now, Mercedes, is that this wave is more organized, resilient, connected, I could argue for that matter, and also knows exactly what to do when they started to move against the police stations, against the centers of the militias. But obviously they are waging calls to the international community. It looks like our president very quickly issued that very powerful tweet yesterday and committed that if the regime is going to go the route of Assad or of the Taliban slaughtering their people, we will do something about it.
That's right. And Steve, exactly what Walid said here. The President Trump said that the U.S. could come to the rescue of protesters, but he also said the U.S. is locked and loaded. I got to ask you here. I mean, we know that President Trump, he, went after Iran and those nuclear facilities. He was very strong in how he delivered in destroying those nuclear facilities. Now he's sending a warning signal to the Iranian regime. Do you think the regime is listening?
I think they have to listen. I'm not entirely sure I know what locked and loaded means at this point, but I do think that it's extremely important that the United States at least find ways to support the communication and coordination and resiliency of the freedom movement inside Iran. That is the best path to regional peace and prosperity there could be if we're going to have peace and prosperity in the broader Middle East. And so I think it's inherently consistent with what the president was trying to do with the Abraham Accords, but also trying to make sure that there aren't malign influences that spill over. The worst example I think Walid was alluding to was the Obama administration when we had the Green Revolution, and we essentially let the regime use Chinese-like tactics to clamp down on social media and interaction. And hopefully at this point, at the very least, we can help them organize, communicate, and sustain what they're trying to do to pursue their own freedoms.
Walid, Steve brings up a good point in the sense of what the U.S. can do in supporting the protesters. Who else do you think is also supporting the protesters, and who's on the side of the regime?
Well, let me start by your conclusion. The most formidable weapon, which is not arms, that we have is our president. In one speech, like what Reagan has done with Gorbachev, Mr. President, tear down the wall. That was not just, these were not words. This was a policy change with regard to the Soviet Union at the time. So now the president has given us the tip of the iceberg. That tweet is very important. If he follows with an actual speech from the White House to the Iranian people, we don't need to be on the ground. 200 to 300,000 Iranians, mostly youth, and many dissidents from the Iranian army called Artech are on the ground. What they need, the Iranian people needs to hear the voice of the most powerful man in the world, which is Donald Trump at this point in time. And there are multiple ways to actually, because when Steve mentioned about, loaded and locked and etc., it could be many ways. It doesn't have to be Marines on the ground that the opposition is now trying to say, oh, we're going to go to another war. We're not going to any other war. We're ending this war.
But I do have to ask, Steve, because, you do need the weapons. I mean, if you can see with these counter-revolutionaries, they need the weapons in order to overtake the regime, I believe. And you also need the fact that you need some of those in the military to basically leave the regime to help these counter-revolutionaries. So I got to ask you this. Do you actually think that we can achieve regime change in Iran? Is that possible? Look, I come from, my family's Cuban. We've seen and they've talked about regime change all the time. It has not happened in places like Cuba. Is it possible that it could happen in Iran?
Well, I also come from a somewhat jaded by experience point of view of intelligence communities saying the North Korean regime was dead to rights in the late
Yeah.
1990s, and it's still kicking around. The evil Communist Party of China has been doing terrible things to people for decades, and yet still is hanging on and being engaged as a normal country by a lot of others. So it's hard. But at the same time, every once in a while, history presents a crack in the system. I think the best example is when you have kind of the sword of righteousness together with a social or labor movement. And as Walid was referring to, some real compelling leaders of the world speaking. Last time those stars aligned was Pope John Paul II, was Margaret Thatcher and Ronald Reagan in solidarity in Poland. If there are elements of these things that come together in Iran, I do think there's civilizational foundation for change. But it's hard to see the military and the police force, what assets we have where they might side with the right side of that equation at this point.
When I've spoken, Walid, to Iranian leaders in exile, for example, the Crown Prince, I mean, there's always that tension of, do they bring the monarchy back? Do they not? How would they move forward with a regime change? What do you think that would look like?
Really, what has to change is not the actual constitution of the regime and the paperwork. What needs to change are those mullahs in control and the heads of the militias. So everything should go through, in my view, a transitional government. A transitional government like de Gaulle. De Gaulle has created this transitional government. He had the support of America, of Winston Churchill. And when the Nazi regime started to collapse, there are different ways to do it. The Allies chose to do their way. But it could be that the people of Iran can paralyze up to 75% of the institutions and the militias inside Iran. They are already in control of about 30%. The question is, and I think the president understood that now that they are on the offensive, the revolutionaries, the freedom fighters, all they need right now is a speech. And after that, of course, when the U.S. government capabilities connect also with the Israelis and with other players in the region, it's toast for the regime.
I hope you're right. I do think that we're going to need to see a lot of organization within Iran to take on and take over the mullahs and see what they can take, what can happen there. But we'll keep a close eye on it. Walid Phares and Steve Yates, thank you so much.
Thank you for having us.
Coming up, feeling the heat. After months of boat strikes, Venezuelan dictator Nicolás Maduro says he is ready to make a deal with the United States. That when the record continues.
Charlie was the best of America, and the monster who attacked him was attacking our whole country.
Before Charlie Kirk died, he issued a stark warning of terrifying dangers ahead in a new book, Pagan Threat, authored by Pastor Lucas Miles. Charlie said Pagan Threat could save America and that you must read it. Get Pagan Threat free with Newsmax's special offer. Plus, get Dick Morse's new book, The Real Charlie Kirk. 2 great books with our free offer today.
I'm a stickler for good dental care.
Me too.
Ooh, looking sharp today. But even if we take care of our teeth, we can still get,
Don't say it,
a big dental bill. That's why dental insurance from Physicians Mutual Insurance Company is important. It helps pay for over 400 procedures, all with no deductibles and no annual maximums. Call or go to dentalnow.com for your free info kit with all the details. Physicians Mutual, Physicians Mutual.
What does Under Outfit feel like? So comfortable and soft, it's like we designed our bras to be forgotten. Try them at home for 180 days. Also available at Nordstrom.com. Under Outfit, engineered for happiness.
Affordable dentures and implants just got even more affordable. We're partnering with over 30 insurance providers nationwide, helping you save more while getting the care you need. We make quality care accessible, so you can restore your smile and feel like yourself again. Affordable dentures and implants. That's what we do.
a moment quick.
Schedule your consultation
Yeah, it
at
felt just
affordablедentures.com or call 1-800-DENTURE today.
Healthy aging support starts here with the innovative nitric oxide science pioneered by Human, supporting your body from the heart out through circulation, blood flow, blood pressure, and energy. Results you can feel, science you can trust. Get started today at livehuman.com.
More boat strikes. The U.S. military says it has struck 5 more alleged drug smuggling boats, killing 8 people and possibly leaving survivors. U.S. Southern Command did not reveal where the attacks took place, but it did say the U.S. Coast Guard was immediately notified to activate search and rescue efforts for the possible survivors. These boat strikes appear to be putting pressure on Venezuelan dictator Nicolás Maduro. Yesterday, Maduro said Venezuela is ready to make a deal with the U.S.
Empezar a conversar en serio, con datos en la mano, y el gobierno de Estados Unidos lo sabe, porque se lo hemos dicho a muchos de sus voceros, que si quieren conversar seriamente de un acuerdo de combate contra el narcotráfico, estamos listos. Que si quieren petróleo de Venezuela, está lista Venezuela para inversiones estadounidenses como con Chevron, cuando quieran, donde quieran y como quieran.
White House correspondent Mike Carter is in West Palm Beach, Florida, where he's going to talk more about Venezuela and what the president is also saying about Iran. Mike?
Yeah, good evening, Mercedes. President Trump has been here at Mar-a-Lago for the better part of 2 weeks. He'll head back to Washington on Sunday. But you speak about those comments of Nicolás Maduro today in that recent interview, saying he's now willing to work with the U.S. on corralling these drug cartels inside Venezuela. That coming just a week after the CIA struck a docking area in Venezuela known to harbor cartel members. So we'll see if President Trump has to say. He hasn't talked about this in the last 24 hours regarding Maduro's latest comments, or Marco Rubio, the State Department. We'll wait to see. But as tensions ramp up in Venezuela, so too, as Zach Anders just told us, inside Iran. It's something the president has been monitoring closely over the last few days. And of course, now 7 people, at least due to reports, confirmed dead because of those protests inside Iran. Many of them, those protesters anyway, students. President Trump says if Iran shoots and kills peaceful protesters, the U.S. is, quote, locked and loaded and ready to go to come to their rescue. Iran is warning of severe response if Trump intercedes, including potential strikes against U.S. military bases in the Middle East. And those comments from President Trump, those locked and loaded comments today come just days after the president met with Israel's Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu here at Mar-a-Lago earlier this week to discuss the possibility of new U.S. strikes on Iran's ballistic missile and nuclear programs.
And speaking of Iran, I hope they're not trying to build up again, because if they are, we're going to have no choice but very quickly to eradicate that buildup. They're not using the sites that we obliterated, but they're using possibly different sites. We know exactly where they're going.
Well, meanwhile, Iran's exiled prince, Reza Pahlavi, the eldest son of the former Shah of Iran, is thanking President Trump, his, quote, strong leadership, unquote, as protests inside Iran continue. Pahlavi writing, President Trump, thank you for your strong leadership and support of my compatriots. This warning you have issued to the criminal leaders of the Islamic Republic gives my people greater strength and hope. Hope that at least as President of the United States is standing firmly by their side as they risk their lives to end this regime's 46-year reign of chaos and terror. They send me with a responsibility and a message to seek the relationship Iran once held with America that brought peace and prosperity to the Middle East. Of course, that's exactly what President Trump tried to do and did do in many respects in 2025, bringing peace across much of the Middle East, forming new alliances, and something the president hopes to continue will happen, especially when it comes to Eastern Europe with Russia and Ukraine. President Trump heads back to Washington on Sunday, Mercedes, next week, and in the coming days, the president says he plans to speak with the heads of major insurance companies to try and get them to lower their premium costs. Mercedes?
President never stops working, Mike. Thanks so much.
Yeah.
Let's bring in retired U.S. Army Lieutenant Colonel Darin Gaub and Heritage Foundation Senior Research Fellow Brent Sadler. Darin, first with you. I want to get your reaction to these boat strikes in Venezuela. Do you think there's any evidence that these strikes are disrupting cartel networks?
Well, I think there very clearly is. First of all, you've interdicted the supply chain, and that in and of itself is already an impact on the drug trade. Now, it's not going to stop it. It's not a huge part of the drug trade, but it's enough to make the message heard. But the real evidence is the fact what you just showed is the video of Maduro saying he's ready to talk to the United States. You didn't hear that before. That's not Maduro thinking that he's suddenly an anti-drug, anti-narcotics trafficking person. That's a guy who's trying to preserve what he's built in that country over the years before he loses all of it. Those two things are more than enough to know that it's having an impact, not only on the supply chain itself, but on Maduro's financial well-being and his security inside Venezuela. So I say keep doing it, sink more.
Right. Yeah, I think, Brent, the sustained pressure by President Trump is really having like a mental impact on the Venezuelan president, Nicolas Maduro. I actually thought it was kind of interesting to watch that he did that video in a car, in a moving vehicle. It shows that they're basically changing locations of where he is being positioned right now. What do you make about President Maduro now ready, I think almost desperately, to make a deal with the United States on drugs and oil? Do you think that they can actually come to an agreement?
Yeah, on that video of him in the car, I was waiting for him to actually start breaking out in song, kind of reminiscent of some of the sitcoms we've had in the past. But, I mean, clearly the pressure is working. It's certainly important to keep up the attacks on the drug cartels' logistics network, their shipping, because that's where they're most vulnerable in the international air and water space. But it also means we're going to have to expand that. So these attacks are occurring in the Eastern Pacific as well as in the Caribbean. But the drug routes that these cartels have used in the past do go further south, out through Chile and also through Brazil and Uruguay, to try to get around and in through West Africa into their second largest and almost co-equal market of Europe, Western Europe, for moving their products and staying afloat. So the cartels are going to try and survive. Maduro is simply part of the protection racket that they rely on. And it's very clear that the pressure is working. And I think another critical element is going after the illicit oil network as well that's based out of Venezuela.
Yeah, I mean, the cartels are trying to survive. Maduro's trying to survive. Darin, if the U.S. and Venezuela, if they come to an agreement, how do you think this is going to shift Venezuela's relationship with countries like Russia, like China, and Iran?
Well, Russia, China, and Iran are three countries that would not like it if Maduro decided he thought it would be more advantageous to align with a country inside his own hemisphere where he's been operating largely freely for so long. I don't think they're going to like this at all. China specifically has used Venezuela as a launching platform. Iran has used Venezuela and some of the islands to the north as areas to be able to build back places or build back Hamas and specifically Hezbollah and other organizations to work in our hemisphere. So this shows the degradation of the influence of these nations in the Western Hemisphere, where we're cleaning up our own backyard.
Yeah, it's cleaning up our own backyard. And you have to admit, Joe Biden ignored the Western Hemisphere. Here you have President Trump really, I think, engaging in the Western Hemisphere. Brent, I got to ask you this. So when it comes to Venezuela, if we see, do you think this would in any way be able to lead to the topple of Nicolas Maduro? And with that, could it lead also to instability and the toppling of the Cuban communist regime?
Well, one can hope for all of the above. Quite frankly, the objective for American people is the destruction, or bankrupting rather, of this global narcotics cartels that are centered in Latin America. You do that, and then all of the money and the muscle that allows regimes like Nicolas Maduro's to stay in power and suppress the people and run their black markets evaporates. And I think that includes Cuba as well. Cuba has been teetering on collapse for the last several years in very extreme financial straits that hasn't really got enough airtime. But I think you'll see that once the cash cow that's Venezuela for Cuba disappears, so does Cuba.
So I got to ask you this. How much, Brent, does Venezuela need the U.S. economic engagement right now?
Well, the economic part's been long-standing in the oil business, and that even though they nationalized the industry, there's still some carve-outs that allow some of that oil that's of a type of a grade, a heavy type grade, that our refineries are tuned to. So it makes sense. And quite frankly, the Russians are the only ones that are able to get this product that allows the Venezuelans to move crude to other customers, notably the Chinese. And that's called naphtha. And right now, the Ukrainians are cutting off the ability of the Russians to supply it. So the only way that the Venezuelans are able to pump and move their very thick, heavy crude is with U.S. provisions of this key ingredient called naphtha to actually move it onto a ship and then move it into refineries.
Right. Darin, are there any other countries putting pressure on Venezuela?
Well, you can guarantee there's some backroom discussions going on with those three countries you mentioned, specifically China, trying to bolster him and say, hey, stay strong against the United States and don't back away from this, because it's not only what's happening to Venezuela specifically. They've seen the election results and the economic success of Argentina. They've seen the recent success in Chile. So I think when you are looking at countries that are pressuring Venezuela, it's going to be those three: China, Russia, and Iran, to try to get him to stay the course.
Yeah, there's surely a wave happening where conservative leaders and free market leaders are winning in countries in Latin America, including Honduras, including Bolivia, including Chile, and of course, Argentina. So let's see if this wave can expand into other countries as well. We're going to be watching closely a Colombian race next year and the big election in Brazil. So lots happening in the Western Hemisphere to keep track of. Lieutenant Colonel Darin Gaub and Brent Sadler, thank you.
Thank you.
At least 40 people are dead and another 119 injured after a fire broke out at a ski resort bar in Switzerland. Police say the blaze erupted inside the Le Constellation bar in Crans, Montana, where crowds were gathered for a New Year's celebration. The fire occurred around 1:30 a.m. local time on New Year's Day. Investigators say the blaze was likely caused by sparklers on champagne bottles, which ignited the bar's ceiling. Swiss authorities are still working to identify the victims. Coming up, Zoran Mamdani takes office. What will it mean for American politics with a socialist in charge of the country's biggest city? That when the record continues.
The affection in which my husband was held by all of you has sustained me.
She was the wife of President John F. Kennedy. She captivated the world with her grace and elegance, even in the darkest moments. Watch Jackie O, A Remarkable Life.
Not again.
Your cold is coming! Your cold is coming!
Thanks, Revere.
We really need to keep Zycam in the house.
Only if you want to shorten your cold. When you feel a cold coming, shorten it with Zycam.
Don't kibble your dog.
Oh, hey, Dr. Marty.
Hey, Bat.
But what's wrong with this? It's premium stuff.
Let's check it out. It's still kibble, which means it's ultra-processed at extremely high temperatures that destroy the nutrients in the food. But at Dr. Marty, we gently freeze-dried premium meats, fruit, and vegetables, locking in their nutrients.
Never kibbled.
You got it, kid, and they're gonna love it.
Drop is finally here. Drop delivers the weight loss benefits of GLP-1 injections in easy-to-use oral drops, no needles.
That's right. The two big drawbacks with weight loss injections are high costs and weekly injections. Drop is flavorless and odorless, so you can just add it to water or your favorite beverage. Drop offers other advantages over injections too. With Drop, you can personalize your dosage based on your weight loss goals.
And because you add Drop to any liquid, there's no concern about injection site infections, bruising, or dosage confusion.
Drop is the easier, safer, cost-effective alternative to help you achieve your weight loss goals without the needles.
Can't find it anywhere? The Wellness Company has it. No consultation needed. Simply order online and use promo code SLIM to save $100. Visit dropthepounds.com/slim. That's promo code SLIM at dropthepounds.com/slim.
Ring in the new year with a kitchen designed to wow. Explore our quality kitchen cabinet collections to find the well-crafted style you want for less with 0% APR for 48 months. Hurry, offer ends soon. Only at Cabinets to Go. Designed to wow.
Think of all the places that could expose you to identity theft. LifeLock monitors hundreds of millions of data points per second and quickly alerts you if we detect any suspicious activity, like changes to your investment accounts, home title, or new loans in your name. All through text, phone, email, or the LifeLock app. Get the alerts that could make all the difference. LifeLock, for the threats you can't control.
This isn't your average pill. This is Rose Sparks. Rose Sparks. Rose Sparks. Rose Sparks.
Rose Sparks is a fast-acting solution because it dissolves under your tongue.
Rose Sparks.
Guys, get started today.
Connect with a provider to find out if Rose Sparks are right for you.
WSOP presents the NFL Poker Experience. Rep your team. Compete in exciting NFL tournaments, win exclusive NFL Poker Championship rings, and collect cards to complete the NFL albums. Download the WSOP free-to-play app for a chance to win $1,000 towards your favorite team merchandise.
A socialist has taken over America's biggest city.
I was elected as a democratic socialist, and I will govern as a democratic socialist. I will not abandon my principles for fear of being deemed radical. As the great senator from Vermont once said, what's radical is a system which gives so much to so few and denies so many people the basic necessities of life.
Zohran Mamdani is vowing to enact a socialist agenda. Yesterday, the 34-year-old signed an executive order revoking all orders signed by former Mayor Eric Adams after September 26, 2024. That was the day Adams was indicted on bribery charges. That case was later dismissed. Mamdani also reversed orders that Adams signed supporting Israel. New York has the world's largest Jewish population outside of Israel. And who was at his inauguration? Well, none other than Mahmoud Khalil, the Syrian-born Palestinian activist who led the fiery protest at Columbia University. You wonder how a socialist taking over New York City will play into the all-important midterms this year. Republicans currently have a slim majority, and it's going to shrink more in 3 days when Georgia's Marjorie Taylor Greene resigns. But there is someone already running to replace her.
Like President Trump, I'm a businessman, not a politician. And like him, I had the same mission, to take out the trash.
That would be Brian Stover. He's joining a crowded race for a seat almost certain to remain Republican. All right, Chairman of CPAC, Matt Schlapp, joins me. Happy New Year's.
Boy, you look so familiar.
All right, let's jump right in, okay? You've got Mamdani. Obviously, he gave this fiery speech, and Bernie Sanders was there, AOC. I mean, all the socialists were lined up at his inauguration, and he's got a very full agenda here. What do you think is going to happen?
Well, let me just start at what we call people matters, the titles. They say Democratic Socialist. You're not for democracy if you don't believe in voter ID. And the Democratic Party has embraced socialism, so he's just a socialist. And what does that mean? That means more taxing of anybody who has any financial success and redistribution of those assets.
Right.
That means DEI. That means the best person doesn't get into the college or the best person doesn't get into the job, but the class of person who comes from some aggrieved part of society gets that. So this is our worst nightmare, and really our most important city in so many ways. And it really makes the rest of the world very nervous about America's future. They felt good when Donald Trump won, but now they're wondering, where's America going to go?
But Schlapp, he's a very charismatic figure in the Democrat Party. Is this where the Democrat Party is headed? Are they at that point that they've just embraced these socialist ideals?
That's right. They're no longer, this is not, some kind of decision point, a fork in the road. They are a socialist party, full on. And Mamdani shows that. I mean, he's not using any poll-tested words. He's saying, I'm going to take your money, and I'm going to give it to people who are here illegally. I'm going to give it to your opportunities to other people. It's where the Democratic Party is. I mean, ask yourself, would Hakeem Jeffries do anything different if he was the mayor of New York City, and I don't think he would.
I got to ask you, though, because we know where the Democratic Party is headed. Well, where's the Republican Party headed? We're seeing Marjorie Taylor Greene. She's going to be resigning in 3 days. You have a very slim majority. There's a lot of stress being put on these, keeping the House majority in particular and the Senate majority in the hands of Republicans. What's going to be the message as we're going into the new year?
Mike Johnson has tremendous character because he has had the world's best office, worst job for a year now, and he's kept it together. He essentially has a one-seat majority. It's nearly impossible for him to navigate, but with the grace of God and his good nature, he's been able to get it done. And this is the real question for the American people. You see Mamdani. Do you want that to be played out in Congress every day with that radicalized agenda, back to DEI, back to no common sense abortion regulations, back to trying to take and ban guns, getting rid of everything in the big, beautiful bill? Do you want that? Because you can have that if you vote Democrat in November.
But when you're looking at the polls, it's clear that this issue, the economic issues, when you talk about the word, the Democrats are using it over and over again, affordability.
Right.
Are the Republicans going to be able to have a winning message on this issue of accountability? How are they going to sell it to the American people? Because President Trump is saying our economy is roaring and we're better now than before. Inflation is down. Yet Americans are still feeling the sense of the fact that prices are still high for them.
So you know this because we spend a lot of time together, but I'm a pretty big Trump fan. So don't take this as anything different from what I've been for the last decade.
Look, I got to be as tough as Greta on the show.
I know,
okay?
I know. You're trying to act like you're independent right now. I got it. By the way, the desk is a lot cleaner than when Greta here. She has folders everywhere. They're very coordinated, but she has a lot of folders. But the point is this, which is Scott Bessent and his guiding of all these regulations at the Department of Treasury, Kevin Hassett, who's in the West Wing, I trust them. They believe that the big, beautiful bill had all kinds of deregulatory measures, which they are implementing month by month by month. This economy will get stronger with each day that goes by. But quite honestly, if something intervenes and the economy is not perceived as strong come November, Republicans are going to have a very hard time. But I'm really glad that President Mike Johnson and John Thune got that bill passed.
Very quickly, what's your message to Republicans for the midterms?
First of all, don't be listening to all these voices in social media that want to have an open civil war within our coalition. We're not all Republicans. We're not all conservatives. We're not all MAGA. But if we stick together, we can beat communism in this country. And what I fear is that this coalition, which CPAC had a lot to do with knitting together, people are very cavalierly cutting at it.
Right.
And it can fall apart. It's much more fragile than they think, and they're stupid to try to break it apart.
Okay, Matt Schlapp, thank you.
Thank you, sweetheart.
Coming up, federal authorities are launching a massive operation in Minnesota. Find out why when the record returns.
O'er the land of the free and the home of the brave.
I'm an artist, and I'm in my studio. I'm hearing the ads about Relief Factor, and I've got pain in my neck, and it's getting worse, and I'm thinking, well, I'm going to go ahead and order this. 2 weeks later, and I've got much better range of motion. I'm able to carry these big canvases around. I'm just very, very grateful that I gave the product a try.
If pain is affecting your life, give Relief Factor a try. Call or go online. Get your 3-week quick start for only $19.95. Fight pain naturally with Relief Factor.
It's time to celebrate with Omaha Steaks' end-of-season event. For a limited time, we're offering 50% off site-wide. That's 50% off all your favorites, like our Butcher's Classic Assortment, including our USDA-certified tender filet mignon and top sirloin fillets, plus chicken, pork chops, desserts, and more, all for just $99.99. Plus, you'll get 8 burgers free when you visit omahasteaks.com/TV today.
Joining us is Dr. Drew from the Wellness Company with advice for dealing with seasonal colds and flu. Doctor?
Cold and flu season is here, and every year you or a loved one gets sick. Your doctor can't see you. Waiting in a crowded urgent care is brutal. This is a particularly bad cold and flu season, and it's why doctors suggest every family needs an emergency medical kit. Your medical emergency kit is filled with essential prescriptions. It includes antibiotics like generic Z-Pak to get well faster, amoxicillin for pneumonia, strep throat, ear infections, plus prescriptions for nausea and UTIs, and even ivermectin. It's easy. Just match your symptoms to the prescription in your guidebook or call the telemedicine doctor standing by. Take your medication early and feel better faster. Having a medical emergency kit is like having an urgent care in your home. No waiting to see a doctor, no lines at the pharmacy.
Smart advice. We've shared the website and discount code below to save viewers $45. Order now and your kit will be rushed to your door. Thank you, doctor.
Set sail toward fast asthma relief with Brethora.
$300 for a refill?
Don't pay that. Use Single Care. Look up your prescription, show the coupon to the pharmacist, and save.
See why more people are saving with Single Care.
People always ask, why Patriot Gold Group? With over 10,000 clients to date and over $1 billion in transactions, not a single complaint on the Better Business Bureau. Consumer Affairs top rated for 9 years in a row. Over 2,000 5-star reviews. The only company nationwide where you, the client, work directly with an owner. Home of the no fee for life IRA. Gold is up 80% in the last 28 months, 275% since Lehman Brothers collapsed. We are patriots protecting patriots. Give Patriot Gold Group a call at 888-528-4290 before it's too late. Patriot Gold Group is Consumer Affairs' top-rated gold and silver dealer 9 years in a row. Call now, 888-528-4290.
The FBI and the Department of Homeland Security are expanding their investigation in Minnesota. They are focusing their investigation on alleged fraud in state-funded programs, especially childcare. This investigation comes after an independent journalist released viral videos claiming misuse of taxpayer dollars. National correspondent Joe Moeller is live from Minneapolis with the latest. Joe?
Yeah, we're just south of downtown Minneapolis. We came to this area because just in a few blocks here, I counted almost 20 of those daycares you're just talking about. And after that viral video, that has prompted more investigators, more agents from the feds to come here for this fraud probe. Now, not only are they looking into the fraud probe when it comes to social services, but also they're taking a look at the Small Business Administration loans now, and also the Department of Justice wants to review voting records here in Minnesota. This was all announced earlier today. Well, thousands of pandemic-era loans in the state, and those are under review by the SBA, and they're suspending about 6,900 borrowers over possible fraud. Those borrowers received PPP and economic disaster loans totaling nearly $400 million. Well, cases will be referred to federal investigators. Now, this morning, the Department of Justice sent a letter to the Minnesota Secretary of State. The Assistant Attorney General says they are demanding records pertaining to Minnesota's vouching system for same-day voter registration, saying this system seems inconsistent with the Help America Vote Act of 2002. Now, this comes as the DHS agents and investigators surge the Minneapolis area, looking into fraud with social services like daycares and home health cares. As you can imagine, taxpayers have questions, wondering where their money is going. We went to the small town of Rogers, Minnesota, earlier, about 30 minutes from downtown Minneapolis, to talk to taxpayers and business owners there.
You know, politically, two things. I'm sad and I'm mad.
What's going on? And why isn't it stopped? And why has it gone on for such a long time?
Then whoever's responsible for any fraud should be prosecuted by law.
I have paid a lot of money in taxes, and I want my money back.
Minnesota fraud is heading to House oversight with hearings next week with state lawmakers, and Governor Tim Walz could be testifying next month. Many want to know how it got this bad. Not only are some lawmakers pushing for Governor Tim Walz to resign, but a Change.org petition is collecting thousands of signatures. As of this morning, there were about 51,000 signatures on that petition. Now, that cites economic concerns and major fraud cases. Take a look at this. Reportedly, in 2018, a state human services employee raised serious concerns about fraud and links to terror, even alerting the higher-ups back around the same time. Tim Walz took office here in the state of Minnesota. Now, we have reached out to his office. We haven't heard back from him. We're trying to learn more about the sort of crackdown they're saying they are doing when it comes to fraud here. And we also reached out to Congresswoman Ilhan Omar's office. We've yet to hear back from her. I'll send it back to you.
Not surprising you didn't hear back, Joe. Joe Moeller, thank you. As 2026 begins, new laws are going into effect all across the country. Let's start in Wyoming. Wyoming will now require legal United States residents who are not citizens, including green card holders, to have the phrase "not U.S. citizens" inscribed on their driver's license or identification card. Now let's go to Washington State. In Washington State, individuals who often work alone, otherwise known as isolated employees, will be required to carry a panic button while they work. The individual's employer will be required to supply the panic button. Okay, that is bizarre. And lastly, to Indiana, a new Indiana law prohibits facilities that host bingo or casino game nights from doing so more than 3 times a night. That means 3 nights a week. Okay, if Grandma Sue would be in Indiana, she would be pretty depressed there. All right, this new law comes after Indiana's Gaming Commission accused a local Elks Lodge of racketeering tied to its charity casino and seized more than $100,000. All right, you can't make that up. All right, coming up, these parts of the country are experiencing some wild weather to start the new year. Find out where when the record continues.
This isn't your average pill. This is Rose Sparks.
Rose Sparks.
Rose Sparks.
Rose Sparks. Rose Sparks is a fast-acting solution because it dissolves under your tongue.
Rose Sparks.
Guys, get started today.
Connect with a provider to find out if Rose Sparks are right for you.
Stay tuned to get this 5-piece bakeware set, a $60 value, absolutely free. Tired of that pan that always sticks? It's so scratched and worn, you can't cook in it.
Hi, Chef Daniel Green here with my new hammered pans from Gotham Steel. This complete 9-piece set is guaranteed to beautify your kitchen like never before.
Gosh, what I love most about this design is this hammered copper look. It would just look so fantastic hanging in my kitchen.
Wow, this is a beautiful pan. It looks great. Look at those eggs dancing around in there. I tell you, I'm sold. Where do I get these? I love them.
Hammered pans are ultra non-stick. Nothing sticks. Even gooey mac and cheese slips out with ease. And look, these sticky candies melted with a torch are no match for hammered pans. Plus, they're super durable, so use metal beaters straight in the pan for a gourmet souffle that slips out and a pan that looks just like new. They're even oven safe up to 500 degrees. So bake homemade chicken pot pie, cheesy lasagna, or this whole chicken dinner. Any recipe looks great in these pans. From steak flambe to delicious desserts and delicate fish, nothing sticks. Plus, the entire set is dishwasher safe and PFOA free.
Similar sets are over $1,000, but you won't pay that. Not $500 or even $300. Get the full 9-piece Gotham Steel hammered set for just 5 payments of $49.99, and we'll even ship it to you free. But order now and we'll drop 1 payment. That's just 4 payments of $49.99, and we'll even guarantee it for a full 10 years. Plus, we'll include this free steamer and strainer, and our 5-piece bakeware set with every pan you'll ever need to make delicious breads, cakes, and desserts. Together, these are an $80 value, yours 100% free. That's a huge 15-piece set with free shipping. Call or click now.
To order, call 1-800-204-6861 or go to buyhammered.com. That's 1-800-204-6861, or you can order online at buyhammered.com.
Affordable dentures and implants just got even more affordable. We're partnering with over 30 insurance providers nationwide, helping you save more while getting the care you need. We make quality care accessible, so you can restore your smile and feel like yourself again. Affordable dentures and implants. That's what we do. Schedule your consultation at affordabledentures.com or call 1-800-DENTURE today.
When it comes to my daily heart health supplement, I've got 3 rules. It's got to be plant-based, it's got to be doctor recommended, and it's got to be Super Beets from Human.
Discover why Super Beets is the #1 cardiologist recommended beet brand for heart health support at livehuman.com.
Both coasts are starting the new year with some wild weather. A winter storm hit millions in the Northeast and the Midwest. It brought bitter cold and snow, and parts of the West Coast are having a wet start to the new year. Heavy rain and king tides or exceptionally high tides could lead to major flooding in parts of California, Washington, and Oregon. Meteorologist Amy Metz joins me. Amy.
Thank you, Mercedes. Yeah, we've had a lot of atmospheric rivers this year. Again, you can see the radar. It's a satellite behind me. So much heading over the West Coast right now. So it's flood alerts for them. But meanwhile, we have had a lot of winter weather advisories across the Northeast. Now, some even picking up some record amounts. Syracuse just this week broke its daily snowfall total, around 22 inches. And now just in the last 24 hours, a little further north of Syracuse, 32 inches has fallen in just 24 hours. So this lake effect snow will continue through the weekend. However, we see much lighter totals when we get closer to the coast there, New York and northern New Jersey, where that'll max out. Now, more snow showers through the week are coming, but it's that atmospheric river in the West Coast where we're seeing a lot of difficulties across the state. Now, Idaho, Montana, we are seeing some icy conditions at the leading edge of that atmospheric river after it coated some of the areas of Oregon and Washington and California in ice yesterday. It was further south that we saw these floods going on. So once again, it was law enforcement saying that there is at least 8 to 10 inches of water on some of those roadways. People were needing to get rescued from their vehicles, and a homeless shelter in San Diego, Mercedes, had to evacuate yesterday. So unfortunately, that weather is going to continue.
Well, stay safe and stay warm. Amy Metz, thank you.
Thank you.
In 2026, America is turning 250 years old. This new year kicked off the celebration, this year-long celebration of America's birthday. And Washington, D.C. has something special to commemorate this milestone. Newsmax national security correspondent Carla Babb reports from Washington.
New York dominates the East Coast New Year's celebrations with its Times Square ball drop. But this year was special for D.C., where the nonpartisan group Freedom 250 launched America's 250th birthday celebrations with animation on the iconic Washington Monument, honoring America's history from 1776 to 2026. The show highlighted the discovery of America, the Declaration of Independence, westward expansion, the Industrial Revolution, and more modern accomplishments such as the moonwalk. Kyle Barrett, the graphic artist who designed the show, told Newsmax while it was complex to project onto a massive obelisk, he felt the final product is inspiring.
I think it's going to be a really cool experience to hear sound bites from JFK or from the moon landing or the moon launch that people have heard about, but to see it in this way, I don't know, there's something about how powerful it is when you're standing there and looking up at I don't know how tall it is, 350-foot monument.
The show is primarily a mix of 2D and 3D animation, even bringing historical paintings from the Capitol Rotunda to life by wrapping them around the monument. New York skyscrapers rise up the monument to showcase American innovation. Anthony Petruzzello came from New York with his family to ring in the New Year in D.C. and was surprised to see a little bit of home during the show.
We saw the Empire State Building, we saw the Statue of Liberty. It brought us back home, and we're just very blessed to have an incredible administration that brings us home for us, and it's an incredible tribute to our beautiful country.
Freedom 250 says the show will run at the top of the hour from 7 p.m. to 11:30 p.m. through January 5th. And just as the Freedom 250 team helped plan Army and Marine Corps 250th birthday displays last year, organizers say there are more events planned at the nation's capital leading up to a big Independence Day celebration. In Washington, I'm Carla Babb, Newsmax.
Thank you, Carla Babb. Well, coming up, it was the coolest New Year's party in Florida. See who attended when the record continues.
You know, folks, I thank God for my wonderful wife, my kids, my country, the greatest nation ever. And Americans like you who believe in the truth, the Chris Salcedo Show will never stop fighting for you.
The Chris Salcedo Show, for the news you need to know.
Are you or a loved one a military veteran that has been diagnosed with mesothelioma? Do you have questions about getting the best treatment or paying medical bills? Have you received the proper care and compensation you deserve? Let our firm serve you with the same dedication you served your country. We are exclusively devoted to helping those with mesothelioma. Call now to get this free book, and we'll answer any question you have. We'll even visit you.
Call 800-555-8958 or go to mesobook.com.
Muscle cramps were keeping me up at night, so then I tried Slowmag, the magnesium plus calcium supplement that helps relax tense muscles so I can rest comfortably. And Slowmag tablets have a slow-release formula that's gentle on my stomach. That's why I use Slowmag.
I'm Elmer Heinrich, at 91 years of age with my wife Shirley, who is 83. Now, both of us are still cutting a wide swath in life, all because of Immuno 150. Now, neither of us have any kind of sickness, and we're as flexible as we were 30 years ago, and we still do the physical things we did 30 years ago. Now, we are asking you to use Immuno 150 like we do. Give it a chance for at least 90 days so that you can see what 70 plant minerals and 80 additional nutrients can do for you. You won't believe it. Immuno 150 is an awesome nutritional supplement. There's nothing like it.
Yes, it really is incredible.
Yeah, try it. You will be surprised. Order online or call the number listed on the screen, but don't place your order until after you've watched the videos on our website. Thank you from both of us, and God bless.
I'm putting with Abe Lincoln's cane right now.
These are 40-something years old.
Yeah. There we go. Oh, come on!
I really believe that God put us on a course to take care of all these catastrophic needs of service members, Gold Star widows.
It's because of all of them that we get to do what we do.
Let's do good together.
Let's do it. People got to give every time I miss.
You got to give $11.
There we go. You're the man. Donate $11 a month at t2t.org.
Don't kibble your dog.
Oh, hey, Dr. Marty.
Hey, back.
But what's wrong with this? It's premium stuff.
Let's check it out. It's still kibble. And even the best kibbles still get kibbled. Which means they're ultra-processed at extremely high temperatures that destroy the nutrients in the food. Then they have to add synthetic nutrients back in just to meet label requirements.
Are they all like this?
Sadly, they are. These poor pups have low energy, bad digestion, itchiness, and allergies, all from eating ultra-processed junk food for every single meal. But at Dr. Marty, we gently freeze-dried premium meats, fruits, and vegetables, locking in their nutrients.
Real meats, real fruits, real veggies, nothing else. Never kibbled.
You got it, kid. So don't kibble your dog. Dr. Marty will make your best friend healthier, and they're gonna love it, guaranteed.
Sponsored by Dr. Marty Nature's Blend, the health of fresh food with the convenience of kibble. Visit drmartypets.com/TV.
As the new year approached, hundreds of manatees were spotted along Florida's western coast. Footage shows the mammals at Three Sisters Springs. That is a wildlife refuge in Crystal River, Florida. The refuge remains at 72 degrees year-round. Manatees flock here each winter to escape cold waters. By spring, these mammal friends will return to the Gulf, but for now, it looks like they might stick around for a while. Sounds just so lovely. Okay, well, maybe we'll see you there in Florida. But now, the Chris Salcedo Show is up next.